morning and welcome to Morning Job. We're brought to you by Getco Cafe and Market, where they have fresh brewed espresso from an Italian espresso machine. You can get it hot like Chris and I have here, or you can get it iced or frozen because it is very hot right now. But I'm Dale Lolley here with Chris Bradford. And Chris, you're heading to Dallas this weekend for the NHL Draft. Penguins have no pick in the first round, but they do have one in the second.
No, they have 6 picks in total, including the one in the second, number 53, and then again quickly in the third round at number 64. So the Penguins are confident that they still can get a pretty good pick, even in those little middle rounds of the draft. But fourth straight year without a first-round pick, I don't know how sustainable this is in the long run, but when you're still in the window to keep winning Stanley Cups, Jim Rutherford's been willing to move that top pick. Yeah,
that's been the one thing that you've noticed about Rutherford. He hasn't been afraid to move those first-round picks. And it's a little bit different than, say, the NFL draft, where those first-round picks are pretty valuable. These are guys that may or may not get there.
Yeah, even in the first round, it's probably a 50-50 that the guy's going to make the NHL at some point in his career. I mean, usually it's only the top 5, 10 guys that are usually pretty good locks, and even then, there's more than a handful of cases where even the number 1 overall pick has been totally flamed out. So, where the Penguins are right now at 53, they have to get a pretty good pick there because they have to keep sustaining the success that they've had. But it's not the sure thing that they've had, like in a Sidney Crosby.
Yeah, you have to be in the top to get one of those guys. And we're going to talk about if there are one of those guys in this draft after this break. Chris, usually when you have a draft, there's a clear-cut number 1 pick, and maybe some clear-cut top guys. Who are the guys in this year's NHL draft?
Yeah, this is considered a fairly deep draft, but there is pretty much a consensus number 1. That's going to be defenseman Rasmus Dahlin, a Swedish guy. He's going to be going to the Buffalo Sabres. I'll be reunited with Jason Botterill, of course, the former Penguins assistant general manager. Buffalo's starting to turn things around, and Dahlin is seen as one of those generational type players. He is a defenseman, so it's fairly rare for a defenseman to go with the number 1 overall pick, but everyone's confident that this guy can be a real difference maker in the league.
Now, can he be a scorer, or is he more of a defensive defenseman?
He's plays a pretty good two-way game. There's been a lot of comparisons out there. Some people have compared, of course, because he's Swedish. You have to say, Nicholas Lidstrom and Erik Karlsson and Victor Hedman. I think Hedman is probably the closest comparison. He plays a good, solid 200-foot game. He's not going to be Paul Coffey, and I don't think he's got the offensive instincts of Erik Karlsson. But the opinion is that this guy is going to be a great player in the league for a long time to come.
Now, Chris, with the 53rd pick in the second round, there's a lot of guessing who the Penguins might be able to get at that pick. Who are you looking at as a possibility for them there?
The one guy I really liked, and I wrote about this this week, was Jack Drury. The guy who's going to be going to Harvard. So, he's an intelligent guy, but he's also, his uncle was Ted Drury, Chris Drury is his uncle, Ted Drury is his father. He comes from great bloodlines. He plays the kind of game that the Penguins have looked for in players in their recent past. He's a little bit on the smaller side, but he's a tenacious player. He plays a 200-foot game. The scouts have raved about him. He's kind of expected to go in the second round, so that would put him in line for the Penguins to take at 53 or even possibly at 64 in the third round. But if I was looking for one name, that would be the guy I really like.
Is he somebody that the Penguins might have to move up to go get?
No, I think he's one of those guys. I think if you moved up to get him, you might be reaching for a player like him, but I think he's a player who fits in that range at 53 where the Penguins, could get somebody. I don't suspect the Penguins are going to go up higher into the draft, move into the first round, if that's what you're asking. But no, I don't. I talked to Jim Rutherford last week a little bit about that, about the draft and the start of free agency, and he said he didn't think he was going to move into the first round because if you're not getting into the top 5, top 10 picks, it's not worth your time.
Now, you mentioned free agency. Do you expect them to be active on the free agent market, or do you expect any trades before the draft or during the draft?
It's interesting because, July 1 starts free agency, but really it's draft weekend when a lot of movement is at least discussed. So a lot of trades tend to happen during the draft weekend, and I suspect that the Penguins might make a trade. I don't know if it's going to be for Phil Kessel. I know there's a lot of speculation going around there that it might be Kessel and that the Penguins might make a big trade like that. I would think it would be a little bit on the smaller side.
And Chris, you had an interesting piece on the site yesterday morning about Barry Trotz's resignation from the Washington Capitals and what that means for the Capitals and how difficult it is to repeat when you change coaches. This isn't the first time this has happened in the NHL.
No, it's happened 4 times, which isn't a lot of times, but the only team who's won a Stanley Cup and then had a different coach the following year was the Pittsburgh Penguins in 1992, and of course that was because Bob Johnson had passed away that fall. Scotty Bowman takes over, but again, what I wrote in that piece was, not to diminish what Bob Johnson did or Scotty Bowman did. The Penguins had a great team. I mean, they had obviously Mario Lemieux and a great supporting cast around them. the Washington Capitals are a very good team. They won the Stanley Cup. Let's give them the credit for doing that. But they're not a dynasty-type team. To me, Washington's success this year was sort of what I would call a salvage mission. They were trying to rescue Alex Ovechkin.
And they got hot at the right time. I mean, they did. I mean, you have to give them credit.
Yes.
They came back from being down 2-0 to Columbus. They lost 3 games in a row in the conference finals to
yeah, they were down
Bay.
3-1 to
Yes.
Tampa Bay.
So I mean, they showed a lot of resiliency, much more than they'd ever shown before, and Trotz was a part of that. But it's going to be interesting to see, how they come back next year now that you have that target on your back.
Yeah, and I think, if the Capitals were to repeat, and as Penguins fans know, it's very difficult to repeat. It's only happened once in the last 20 years that a team has done it, and that was the Penguins. If the Capitals were going to do it, they would have to have Barry Trotz, I would think, to do it. If they bring in a new coach, and it's rumored to be that it'll be Todd Reardon, the former Penguins assistant under Dan Bylsma, the Capitals would have some continuity, but I think Barry Trotz would represent their best chance at repeating.